While Jump Works and my works in general try not to assess any particular piece of art in a void, Togashi specifically is a man that absolutely cannot be discussed in a vacuum. Yu Yu Hakusho is a series that almost feels out of place in Shonen Jump. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Sandland, Shaman King, One Piece, and several other series that we'll discuss in later episodes of Jump Works, in many ways feel like a response to Dragon Ball Z. All of them are commentaries about a world after Dragon Ball Z. Sandland was designed to be a series that was very humble in terms of scope because Dragon Ball was such a long series. Yu-Gi-Oh! Came from the idea of subverting heroes like Goku, blessed with colossal might. Shaman King, One Piece, and Naruto dedicated themselves to picking up the torch and running with several embers that Dragon Ball would have gave hints to, while also maximizing the genre fiction flavor that Dragon Ball was sometimes very inconsistent with. Yu Yu Hakusho, on the other hand, isn't about a world after Dragon Ball, but it was Dragon Ball's contemporary. Yoshihiro Togashi found himself with the very unenviable task of selecting to write an action series while Dragon Ball, JoJo, and Saint Seiya were all at arguably the heights of their respective empires. While this is probably a topic that we can go into in a much longer video, in short, Togashi had to ask himself what made his work unique relative to his contemporaries, and the answer to that would be his characters and the worlds that he creates. Yu Yu Hakusho is the story of Yusuke Urameshi, a general punk and menace to society, who after an act of kindness suffers an untimely demise, but is then given the chance to return to the living world. Normally this would be an interesting enough plot as is, however this is only the first step in Yu Yu Hakusho's story. Yusuke goes on to be an agent for the underworld, setting things right when there's an imbalance between the human, demon, and underworlds. These are contextualized as detective cases, but usually go down as some type of infiltration followed by a brawl. Where Dragon Ball and Yu-Gi-Oh! Would have a mostly disjointed first act, Yu Yu Hakusho differs in that its first act was actually intentional. Whereas Dragon Ball and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were generally good series that found their footing doing something totally different, Yu Yu Hakusho, on the other hand, intentionally set out to do something different to let Togashi get a better feel for these characters and let the audience become more and more invested for when the stakes would eventually get much higher. They focus less so on fights, but Yusuke dealing with the fact that he's now a ghost and proving himself worthy to return to the living world. Again, this is intentional as Togashi felt it wasn't especially wise to come out of the gate swinging when his current day competition is a mid-Frieza arc Dragon Ball and a mid-Egypt JoJo. Togashi decided to write the first 30 or so chapters more so in his character-driven style, while most of this was skipped in Yu Yu Hakusho's anime adaptation, and reasonably so for its tonal and pacing issues. Much like how Yu-Gi-Oh! Would establish a genuine love of games in all of their forms in a very pure language, untainted by necessarily trying to sell you anything, Yu Yu Hakusho establishes that every character Togashi writes is the hero of their own story, from 2-bit bullies and mean one-off teachers to the later world-ending villains whose arc plays out closer to melodramas entirely independent of Yusuke's story. However, most of Yu Yu Hakusho's run is a fighting series, and boy does it fight with the best of them. Unlike Takahashi, where he has a strong idea about games conceptually, but questionable ideas about their execution, although wonderful at making it marketable, Yu Yu Hakusho has the opposite in that it's not a game series, but features games in some capacity in all but one or two of its major arcs. Yu Yu Hakusho's battles feel mechanically closer to a video game translated into real life, or in this case a comic book. And this isn't a thing that is super uncommon in anime or manga, where characters can track their power levels to an exact percentage, but in terms of mechanical rules and how all these powers work, and the multiple factors and abilities layering on top of each other, end up usually playing some type of part in these battles. This comes to its ultimate conclusion in Yu Yu Hakusho in the ending of the series, featuring various espers whose powers manifest as quite literal games. And for Togashi as a creator, this reaches an extreme conclusion in the beautifully complicated yet all-encompassing Nin power system from Hunter x Hunter. However, that's not to ignore the world of Yu Yu Hakusho. The thing that makes most of Togashi's work special is how it always feels like a living, breathing place. Characters always have some type of external motivation that is mostly independent of our protagonist. Now, all of these motivations aren't especially complicated, from the monstrous Toguro chasing the dragon of eternal youth, or the catastrophic results of Sensui. a villain who's ultimately somewhat of a kind person on the inside, but was pressed way too far by being made to take part in systematic oppression. And all that is not to forget our memorable protagonist, Yusuke's eternal rival Kuwabara, who's actually a wannabe thug who can't hold a candle to Yusuke in a fight, but has a much clearer calling for heroics than his protagonist counterpart. The demonic duo Hiei and Karama, who are mostly around for personal reasons, but tend to find interesting reasons to stick around the plot that end up being the primary motivation to join Yusuke on his detective cases. For Hiei, it's usually a certain amount of morbid curiosity or cutting off loose ends, or sometimes being strong-armed by the underworld to take part in these cases in exchange for overlooking various demon crimes that he normally does. Kurama, on the other hand, while he is also a powerful demon, he simply decided that the life of a demon bandit is no longer for him, and he'd rather remain with his human mother and simply wants to preserve that newfound lifestyle, even if he does have to get his hands dirty a few times to make it happen. Even the stereotypical girlfriends that tend to get written out of these type of plots have much more agency than you would expect from this type of narrative. The Grim Reaper Botan, who guides Yusuke on his journey, acts as closer to a big sister to him and keeps the gang focused, because this is certainly something that this group would not do left to their own devices. Yusuke's single mother Atsuko generally tries to take an active role in Yusuke's life once it becomes apparent that his job as underworld detective isn't one that he's really able to hide, and it clearly seems to be making Yusuke a more responsible and better person. And his obligatory tsundere girlfriend Keiko isn't angry because she's just sort of like that, like most anime girlfriends would be, but she's angry because she genuinely sees good in Yusuke and he's routinely failed to live up to those standards, and usually leaves her out of the loop in his double life as a detective. So she's just angry out of the fear of losing Yusuke once again without knowing the truth to what happened. Togashi is very careful to give each character plenty of time in the spotlight and adding a level of characterization that just isn't common in shonen manga. The thing that makes Yu Yu Hakusho different from its contemporaries in the American adaptation of Shonen Jump is being a beast from another age that sometimes feels a little bit disjointed. This could be the episode of a whole nother episode of Jump Works, but still, after Dragon Ball Z, there's a tendency to pick a specific genre of fiction that makes the foundation of whatever else you're going to make this series about, while works that came out before or during Dragon Ball's era have a particular emotional theme or idea that they're going for that they build off on. This is probably why Shaman King felt more consistent with its supernatural themes and elements than Yu Yu Hakusho. Not that Yu Yu Hakusho is at all haphazard with it. It has reference to horror movies and ghost stories littered all throughout its story, like Sariyashiki High School being a reference to the story of Bancho Sariyakishi. Several ideas explored by the villains are prone to being referenced to other supernatural stories and beings, like the Saint Beast or the iconic Dark Tournament that has Yusuke and the gang fighting against literal evil versions of fairy tale characters. This is a difficult episode to do because I plan on talking a lot about Yu Yu Hakusho at some other point, hint hint nudge nudge. And I don't want to reveal my entire hand, but this series is truly something special, and as much as it betrays my elitist manga reader blood, as unique a manga as this is, besides the first arc and a few very dubious omissions from its epilogue, Yu Yu Hakusho is one of the few parts of Shonen Jump Works where its anime adaptation may be the superior version of this story. And I say this primarily as a credit to the manga, as at this point it's very common for episodes of anime to be somewhat filled out with more characters talking to each other. And it just so happens that Yu Yu Hakusho's characters are so developed and fleshed out that adding more to the story actually is never a bad thing. Yu Yu Hakusho happens to be a narrative that's filled to the brim with so much energy in the character department, and it hands itself well to expanding on that material, both in terms of adding supplementary characters like the surprise narrator George, the ogre, or by padding for time by elaborating on or navel-gazing a bit on certain character relationships. But if this and me saying Underworld instead of Spirit World has somehow talked you out of reading the manga, please note that every regular chapter cover looks like Togashi is about to drop the hottest album of 1992. For more Yu Yu Hakusho and for more Jump Works, make sure to subscribe to Manga Dungeon and thumbs up the video. On the next piece of Jump Works, Hail to the King.